The wind had already taken the roof off the Whitaker place by the time Emmeline Gage jammed her shoulder into her own cabin door and forced it shut against the screaming white outside. There was blood on her cheek, her own, though she didn't know from what, and her hands were shaking as she fumbled with the heavy wooden bar and dropped it into place. Snow was blowing in through every crack, thin as sewing needles, sharp as razors. The cabin's logs groaned in the gusts, each one a warning, each one saying, "This storm will kill you if you don't remember what your mother told you, or what hers told her before." Inside, her 4 children huddled against the stone hearth. Not a fire, not yet, just a stone mouth with ashes and the ghost of last night's warmth. They stared at her with wide eyes, none of them speaking. Eliza, the oldest, had her arm around baby Thomas, shielding him like it might help. Henry was clutching a wooden spoon like it was a sword. Sarah had both hands pressed over her ears. Emmeline swallowed hard. Then she took off her soaked bonnet, her shoulders already dusted white with snow inside the cabin, and said, "We don't panic, we think." That was what her mother used to say during freezes that turned trees to glass and made men go blind when they stepped outside. Don't panic. Think. Fire wastes fast. Wind eats everything. Use what you know, not what you wish you had. She knew 3 things right then. First, they had 1 log left. One, a thick wedge of old cottonwood, fat as her thigh. It was seasoned, dense and dry, but it would burn clean through in 2 hours if lit wrong. Second, the storm wasn't passing. It was strengthening. The kind that shattered fence posts, dragged plows across fields, and left whole towns digging out frozen corpses come thaw. And third, if she used that log like any normal firewood, they were dead by morning. She didn't wait for her hands to stop shaking. She went to the root cellar, not for food, though there wasn't much of that left either. She pulled the iron ring and yanked open the trapdoor, and for a second she thought the wind might tear it clean off the hinges. But she got it shut behind her and descended into that musky dark below the floorboards, where the real tools of winter survival waited. Not the kind you bought in town, not the kind her husband had left behind when he died, the kind women whispered about to each other when men weren't listening. The storm moaned overhead like it was looking for her. She pulled off her gloves with her teeth and lit a stub of candle. The flickering light revealed what she'd buried in hay, cloth, and patience over 3 long years since she'd first understood how close to death a mother could come without dying. Clay tiles, dug from the riverbank and fired hard in her hearth when fuel had been cheap, smooth and round. She stacked them into a basket. Then the metal funnel, blackened from the last time. Then the old pipe, bent and patched but still whole. She whispered a prayer, not to God, but to the woman who taught her. "Martha Emmons, your tricks better hold." Back upstairs, her children didn't ask questions. They knew better. Eliza helped her clear the hearth and remove the old grate. Henry held the tools. Sarah, bless her, swept ash with the sleeve of her dress. Baby Thomas just watched her with those glassy, sick-looking eyes. "Listen to me," Emmeline said. "Steady now. We're not burning that log until I say. Not one spark. First we build the bed." The bed was not a real bed. It was the layered core of heat-trapping tile she built right into the stone hearth. Tile, then ash, then a metal funnel, then more tile. A slow burn system, not for making a roaring flame, for turning 1 log into 20 hours of radiance. She'd only done it twice before. Once the first year, when they'd nearly frozen to death, and once again the next winter, when a neighbor scoffed and told her, "That's not real heat, that's woman's foolishness." That man had lost 3 toes by February. She remembered how her mother used to line the cabin walls with straw, not for insulation in the way men thought, no, for moisture control, for breathability, for the way warm air clung to it. Her mother used to seal windows with soaked rags, lay wet cloth over vents to trap the heat inside like a sponge. They'd slept with heated bricks at their feet, not blankets. When blankets froze stiff, the bricks kept them alive. All of it came back. The rules, the ways, the things women knew and never wrote down because no man would have bothered reading them. She laid the tile bed. She filled the funnel with iron nails, rusted ones because they held heat better. She laced it with cloth soaked in lard and sand, a method that didn't blaze. It smoldered, radiated, whispered warmth instead of screaming it, and it made the log last. At midnight, she struck the match. The flame took like it remembered its job. A thin line of light, then a red coil, then nothing. No roar, no pop, just heat that crept along the funnel and spread through the tile, slow as honey, sure as morning. The wind screamed again, and Emmeline sat on the floor between her children, her back against the stones, her eyes on the flicker, her hand resting lightly on Eliza's hair. They would survive the night, but the storm wasn't done, because by dawn she saw what it had done to the barn, and what was inside it. The barn roof was gone, not just peeled back or half torn the way she might have hoped, but gone, lifted clean off like a biscuit bracket lid snapped off by an angry hand. It had taken with it the ridge beam, 2 rafters, and all 6 bundles of feed hay she'd stacked herself in September. The storm had carved the loft bare and scattered everything to the hills. The snow was still falling sideways. The wind had calmed enough for her to open the cabin door without breaking her shoulder again, but she could barely see her own fence line through the white fog, and worse than the missing roof was the sound. The horse, screaming. It wasn't a normal whinny, not a panicked stamp from a startled animal. It was a scream, the high, human-like kind that only happened when something big was breaking inside the beast. Emmeline's boots hit the porch before she even knew what she was doing. The cold stabbed up her legs through the wet leather like ice nails. The snow was past her knees. The wind bit her throat, but she kept moving, past the frozen wash tub, past the churn toppled on its side and half buried, toward the lopsided barn. She nearly tripped twice, but kept going. The door was hanging open, and inside, the sight stopped her dead. The mare, her husband's old grey Moll, was caught. The collapse had shoved a beam down into the pen and pinned the animal against the wall. Not crushed outright, not yet, but the beam had landed diagonally across her haunches and bent her leg backward at a sick angle. The horse's flanks heaved, her eyes rolled, blood streaked her side. The rest of the barn was blown-out wreckage, feed bins overturned, straw plastered to the walls with frost, ice climbing every board like the building was growing a second skin. Emmeline didn't move for a second. Her breath steamed around her head in plumes. Her fingers had gone numb, and she couldn't remember if she'd even brought gloves. The horse groaned again, not just sound, a plea. There was no help coming, no man with a saw, no neighbor with a team. There was just her and the sound of something big dying wrong. She stepped inside. The beam had fallen from the loft and caught on one of the half-loosened joints in the wall. It wasn't as heavy as it looked, but it was wedged. She'd have to shift it up and over a crooked nail that held it in place, which meant leverage, which meant tools, which meant the old iron bar behind the coop. She ran back through the storm, chest heaving, snow up to her thighs now, dug bare-handed through the drift until she found it. She slipped once on the way back and hit her head hard enough to see stars, but she made it, back to the barn, back to the mare. The horse didn't fight her. Moll never had, not even when her husband had broken her to saddle with more whip than patience. The mare watched her now like she understood exactly what was happening and knew this might be the last chance either of them got. Emmeline wedged the bar under the beam and braced it against the stall rail. Ice cracked, her boots slid, her arms shook. She leaned her full weight against it and gritted her teeth. She felt something in her shoulder pop, but the beam moved, just enough. The horse screamed once more, then the beam fell off to the side. The mare collapsed fully now, legs buckled, head down, whole body steaming in the frozen air, but she was free, breathing, bleeding, but alive. And Emmeline? She collapsed too, right there in the straw. It wasn't until she smelled the blood on her own hands that she realized she'd scraped both palms open. Her lip was split, her braid frozen stiff, her dress soaked from the knees down. She might not have survived herself if Eliza hadn't come after her. "Mama!" the girl screamed from the yard, her small frame barely a shadow in the blizzard light. "Mama, what are you? Get back inside." Emmeline's voice cracked from her throat. "You hear me? Get the kettle back on. Heat more stones. I'm coming." But she didn't come right away. She waited, watched the mare breathe, ran a hand over the animal's flank, and whispered something. She didn't know what. The horse didn't move. The return to the cabin felt longer than it was. Her body was past cold now, moving only because it remembered how. Her eyes stung. Her hands barely gripped the door latch. Inside, warmth waited. Not fire, not flame, but warmth. That low, deep radiance from the tile hearth, spreading like something alive. The children had laid quilts over the floor. Henry had stuffed cloth into the wall cracks. Eliza had warmed flat stones by the funnel and wrapped them in rags to place under the blankets. Emmeline sat down, didn't speak for a long time. When she did, it was only, "We'll get through tonight, maybe another, but then we ration." "Food?" Eliza asked. No, her voice was flat. Wood, they had none. Not real wood, just twigs, sticks, and that one last log, the one that still sat untouched, waiting like a king in exile. But she wasn't done yet. She made a plan. The snow wouldn't let up, but that didn't mean the world was gone. It meant they had to go under it, not through it. She waited till morning, when the wind slowed. Then she tied a rope around her waist and handed the other end to Henry. "If I tug twice, pull hard," she told him. Then she opened the cellar door and crawled down into the cold earth again, not to find heat this time, but space. The root cellar had been dug deep, wider than most, thanks to her husband's pride and his stubborn belief in winter potatoes. But it wasn't what it had been built for that mattered now. It was what it could become. She cleared shelves, pulled down old sacks, dug along the rear wall with her bare hands, and found what she needed. The loose dirt behind the far crate of onions, the spot where the wall bowed inward slightly, and the frost never quite reached. A tunnel maybe, a new way to stretch the cabin beyond its own bones. The trick wasn't digging, it was knowing where the warmth wouldn't run. The old women had called it breath paths, the invisible trails where heat moved through ground like scent through a dog's nose. If you dug wrong, the cold filled the gap and froze you inside your own hole. But if you followed the path, Emmeline worked by candle. She packed clay from the walls to shore the top. She used broken shelves for makeshift beams. She moved slow, patient, like a woman weaving her own salvation. By dusk, the tunnel reached the side of the cabin, and the day after, it stretched beneath the destroyed barn. She was going to build a chamber under it, not to live in, but to draw heat to, a warm air sink using the same principle her grandmother once used in Maine to dry clothes during a blizzard. Downward air movement from a funnel-shaped hearth, captured in a sealed dugout, then fed back up through a vent. Not firewood, not coals, just one log, made to last. But it wasn't just the storm and cold that threatened them now. Not anymore, because on the third night, when the wind had stilled and the frost clung in long white fingers to every rafter and window, a shadow moved by the tree line. Emmeline saw it through the cracks in the wall while adjusting the clay vent. Not an animal, not a fox, not deer. It was a man, and he was watching the house. She didn't tell the children. Not yet. She just went to the bed, pulled out the old pistol, the one with only 2 rounds left, the one her husband never bothered to keep clean, and then she sat beside the hearth, warmed her hands over the silent tiles, and whispered, "We'll survive this storm, but I swear to God, if he steps through that door, I'll survive him too." He came nearer on the 4th day, not bold, not stomping toward the door like he owned the world, but slow, slinking, testing. Emmeline watched from behind the cracked shutters, barely daring to breathe. He had no horse, no wagon, just a hunched figure in a long coat pulled tight around his ribs, walking through the drift like he'd crawled out of a grave. The snow didn't seem to touch him. That was the part that made her skin crawl. The way he moved, too steady, too upright, like he hadn't been touched by the same storm that had broken roofs, bent trees, and nearly ripped her door off its hinges. He passed behind the barn ruins, didn't approach the cabin, not yet, just looked once, and disappeared. That night Emmeline didn't sleep, the children did, eventually curled up close together by the hearth, like a litter of kittens drawn to a silent mother cat. But Emmeline sat upright against the cabin wall with the pistol in her lap and the vent's soft warmth brushing her legs like breath. The chamber she'd dug beneath the barn was working better than she dared hope. The downward draft pulled warm air into it, held it there, let the floor retain a heat that lingered into the coldest part of the night. The log hadn't been touched. They were still surviving on ash, brick, and clay. But warmth didn't stop hunger. By morning, Sarah had dark rings under her eyes. Henry was pale. Even baby Thomas wouldn't cry anymore. He just lay quiet, sucking on a corner of blanket. There were 2 jars of beans left, half a tin of flour, salt, if that counted, and nothing else. Eliza asked the question no one else would. "Ma, what if we don't make it?" Emmeline didn't raise. Her voice didn't turn on her. She just looked her daughter dead in the eye and said, "Then it won't be because I let some stranger out there get here first." Eliza didn't ask again. The man didn't return during the daylight, but on the 5th night, they heard it, quiet at first, a scraping noise, not wind, not animal. Something fingering the back wall of the cabin. She snapped up, motioned to the children with one hand to be still, and crept toward the sound barefoot. The boards near the vent were warm under her toes. She pressed her ear to the wall, breathing, not loud, not panting, just steady, intent. He was listening. She pulled back, heart hammering so loud she thought it might give her away. Then came the second sound, not his, but Sarah's, a cough. Dry, too loud, the kind that cracked through silence like a whip. The breathing stopped, the scraping moved, soft footfalls retreating, snow crunch, then gone. But she knew now. He wasn't lost. He wasn't seeking shelter. He was watching them, listening, waiting. There were no laws this deep into winter. Not now. Not in a freeze like this. The sheriff wouldn't come. Neighbors weren't close enough to hear a scream. No one could ride through these drifts unless they'd lived here. And even then, only if they had reason, which meant this man had none of the right reasons. The next morning, she braved the barn again, dug further into the chamber. She needed a place for the children if the worst came, somewhere they could hide, warm, out of sight. It was on her second trip down that she noticed something strange. The walls of the chamber, lined with packed snow and clay, had started to melt in soft arcs. Not leak, not drip, but melt, like the heat from above was pooling and reshaping the space like breath shapes a mirror. And in the middle, the stone she'd placed as an anchor for warmth had begun to radiate something deeper. Not red hot, not even warm to touch, but alive, holding the fire without flame. It was working better than her mother had ever taught. It wasn't just preserving warmth, It was breeding it, letting it settle, roll, cling. She added another layer of straw, set blankets, then placed 2 small stones inside, heated from the funnel hearth. The chamber glowed a little when she left, but the man came again that night. This time he wasn't quiet. A knock, 3 slow raps against the front door just before dusk, then silence. She didn't move, just raised the pistol and stood behind the hearth's curve. Another knock, then a voice. "Ma'am, I mean no harm." It was a dry, scraping voice, not cracked, measured, something too calm for the chaos outside. "I saw smoke," he continued. "I'm cold." She said nothing. "I know you have a family," he added. "I won't come in, just food, a little warmth." Still, she said nothing, not until Eliza looked at her and whispered, "Mama." Then Emmeline stepped toward the door and said, clear and hard, "Keep walking, there's nothing here for you." "You sure?" the man said, voice lower now. "You come closer," she said, "and I'll bury you so deep the spring won't find your bones." Silence. Then his boots moved again, not hurried, just slowly walking away. She waited, counted to 100, then again. Only when full dark settled did she dare light the lantern. That night she sat beside the children and told them a story. Not a happy one, not a fairy tale, a memory. "My mother used to say," she told them, "that every woman on this land keeps a bit of the storm in her chest, the part that survives when nothing else should. Not because we're braver, just because we have to be." Eliza leaned into her. "Grandma used to light her hearth once a week," she went on. "Just once, and she made that heat stretch 7 days, because she had to. Not magic, just knowledge. Knowledge passed down because nobody else thought it mattered enough to remember." The children didn't speak. "Everything we need," Emmeline whispered, "we already have. We just forgot how to use it." By the 7th day, the food was gone, the final jar scraped clean, the last flour pinched for a biscuit that barely fed the baby. And then, before she could even think about what to do next, came the knock again, this time louder and not alone. 2 voices now, male, 1 younger. "We know you're in there." Not a plea this time, a threat. Emmeline stood slowly. She opened the hidden hatch to the root cellar, gestured to Eliza. "Take them, down, quiet." "Mama, what?" "Now." She loaded the 2nd round into the pistol. The cylinder stuck. She forced it, then stepped toward the door. Another knock, then the sound of a boot kicking the wall. "I swear to God," she whispered to the floorboards, "I will not let you take this from me." A boot hit the door. She raised the pistol. The lock held. A second kick. The frame cracked. Then a third voice, low, urgent, and female. "You damn fools! I told you to leave it be." Then a scuffle, movement, a sharp yelp, and silence. Emmeline didn't move, not for a long time. Then a soft tap, not at the door, at the window. And there, through the snow fog, she saw her, a woman, wrapped in furs, bare hands up, standing alone, and behind her, 2 men sprawled in the snow, groaning, not dead, but disarmed. The woman spoke gently, through the shutter. "I'm not here to take," she said. "I'm here because I saw your smoke." Emmeline lowered the pistol, didn't open the door, but she didn't raise the gun again either. The woman pressed something through the crack, a bundle, wrapped in cloth, still warm, bread, and inside, salt pork, beans, dried apple. "You saved them," the woman whispered. "You used the old methods." Emmeline said nothing. The stranger nodded, slowly. "My mother taught me too." And then she turned and vanished into the storm, leaving only footprints that would freeze over before morning. Emmeline didn't open the door until morning, not until the wind had fully stopped, and the sky over the trees turned pale enough to see the color of death on it, that washed out white where no shadow fell, no warmth returned, no sound carried. She kept the pistol in her apron, stepped out slow. The footprints were still there, leading away, and true to what she'd seen in the night. 2 shapes lay crumpled off to the side of the path, half buried now. One of them groaned when she neared. The man on the left was young, not much older than Eliza, with a busted lip and his coat inside out. The other, older perhaps 35, had a badly twisted arm and a knife still strapped to his belt. She took the knife without ceremony, didn't speak, didn't threaten, just stepped back and looked at them the way winter looks at trees, without interest. "She came out of nowhere," the younger one muttered. Emmeline didn't respond. "She kicked my knee, used a damn shovel." Still, she said nothing. They didn't ask for help, maybe because they knew they wouldn't get it, or maybe because they finally saw what kind of woman lived in that cabin. Not just a mother, not just some lone widow with quilts and tea and a fire to offer. No, she was a thing shaped by the cold, forged by it, burned into something lean and sharp and too tired to be afraid. She left them there, returned inside with the knife and the bundle. When she opened it fully, the cloth cracked with frozen folds, but inside, still wrapped in oil paper, was food. Real food. Beans dried in salt, apple slices dusted in flour, even pork fat wrapped in wax skin, and at the bottom, a small folded paper with one word, share. She stared at that that word for a long time. By the stove, the children watched her silently. Eliza held Thomas, who looked more alive today. Sarah had color in her cheeks again. Henry's hands had stopped shaking. "Who was it?" Eliza finally asked. Emmeline didn't answer right away. Then, "Someone who remembers." The days that followed were not easy. The snow didn't melt, but the storm had passed. In its place was a stillness colder than before, a quiet that wrapped the land like a shroud. She used the food sparingly. She rationed the warmth even tighter. The log remained untouched. She taught the children how to catch warmth instead of chase it. She showed Eliza how to breathe over clay tiles to find the ones still holding heat, how to press your palm to the floorboards to know where to lay the quilts, how to listen, not for noise, but for the absence of it. Where silence gathered, cold followed. They layered straw behind every cloth panel, soaked rags in warm salt water, and lined the window seams. Emmeline even tore apart the baby's crib and laid the wooden slats under the sleeping stones. Heat rose better through thin wood than thick. Her mother had said so. So had her grandmother. And on the 8th day, something changed. Emmeline felt it before she saw it. A softness to the cold, a looseness in the frost. The wind turned, just slightly, and the sun, hidden for nearly a week, laid a pale yellow band across the front steps. Thaw would come. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it would come. She opened the vent fully that day, let the warm air from the underbarn chamber roll higher. It fogged the windows and dampened the floorboards, but it also pulled the chill from the beds. The children smiled again. Thomas even laughed once, though it sounded more like a cough. She had nearly begun to hope, and then came the tracks. They weren't boots, not deer either. No hooves, bare feet, tiny, one set, walking through the snow, just past the edge of the tree line, cutting behind the barn and toward the ridge. A child. Emmeline stared down at them from the hill, heart thudding. The prints were small, no bigger than Sarah's, but deep. Someone walking barefoot through this freeze should be dead, should have dropped within yards. But the tracks didn't end. They led toward the gorge, the one locals used to call Widow's Hollow, before the trail washed out and the logging road fell into ruin. She didn't want to follow. Every bone in her body said to turn back, seal the door, light the last log, and stay with her children. But the tracks kept gnawing at her mind, bare feet, in a freeze, moving like they knew where they were going. That night, she slept in shifts, woke every hour, checked the door, watched the tree line, and at some black hour between midnight and dawn, the knock came again, this time lower, not sharp, just present. She stood with the pistol in hand, moved to the door, then a voice, this time not a man's, a girl. Small, clear. "Please," just that, one word. Emmeline flung the door open before thought caught up with her, and standing there, barefoot, wrapped in a fur 3 sizes too big, lips blue, was a child no older than 6, alone. She collapsed before Emmeline could catch her. She was still alive. That was the first miracle. Her hands were cracked, raw to the bone in places, but her pulse held. Emmeline wrapped her in heated cloth, laid her beside the tiles, and pressed warm stones to her ribs. The girl didn't speak until the 2nd day. Her name was Clara. She had no last name. She didn't say much else, not until Emmeline asked the only question that mattered. "Where are your people?" Clara just pointed, toward the ridge. "There's a place," she whispered, eyes half closed. "Women live there, not men." Emmeline frowned. "How many?" Clara shrugged. "I think lots." Lots. That was the word she used. It was Eliza who understood first. "The woman who helped us," she said. "The one with the food. She's from there." Emmeline didn't want to believe it. Places like that didn't exist. Couldn't. Not in this world. And yet, something in Clara's face said it was real. She was taken in, protected. She didn't speak like a lost child. She spoke like a message. That night, Emmeline couldn't sleep again. The storm was over, but something deeper stirred in her. A hunger, not for food, for memory, what had been lost, what her mother used to speak of, with half a smile and a sad look toward the horizon. "Once," she used to say, "we knew how to survive without help, just us. Just women. There were places you could go in a bad winter where only women would take you in, and only women could keep you warm. They knew the land better, knew the storms deeper. Men built cabins, but women built heat." She'd thought it was just a story, until now. Clara was the proof. And Emmeline, she wasn't sure what to do with it. But on the 9th morning, before the thaw had truly started, before the log was burned, before she could tell herself it was a dream, another bundle appeared at the door. No knock, no voice, just food. And this time, alongside it, a map drawn on cloth, with one spot marked in charcoal, a place, a trail, through Widow's Hollow, and written on the edge, just one line. "When the last log burns, come find us." She waited 4 more days before she believed it. Clara didn't speak of the place again, didn't volunteer stories, but each night after the children slept, she would lay with her back to the hearth and whisper things into the tiles, like prayers or fragments of songs too old to remember the words. Emmeline never asked what she said, but she listened, and some part of her began to change. The storm was over, but the air still held its memory. Each gust of wind rattled the shutters like a warning. Each creak of the cabin's timbers felt like the moan of a buried thought. The snow softened during the day, but froze solid again at dusk. A false thaw, just long enough to fool a careless soul into thinking they could risk the open trails. And the food, while stretched by the stranger's gifts, wouldn't last forever. But the strangest change wasn't outside. It was the way her children began to behave. Eliza took to tending the hearth, not just feeding it, but studying it. She crouched for hours, eyes fixed on the slow movement of heat between the tiles, learning to read warmth like a second language. Sarah started lining the blankets with dry grass for insulation, not because Emmeline told her, but because the cloth breathes better that way. Henry stopped pretending to be brave. He began asking questions, real ones, like why heat clung lower than cold, why lard burned longer than wax, why her grandmother used bricks instead of coals. And Emmeline told them, all of it, things she hadn't thought of in years, memories handed down through generations like secret instructions stitched into their blood, that women survived storms by building homes, not shelters, that heat wasn't made, it was caught, held, stretched, that sometimes the difference between living and dying was knowing how to trap the breath of a single burning log. The log, it still sat beside the hearth, 7 inches thick, a slab of old cottonwood cured too long in the rafters. She'd waited, saved it, treated it like gold. Now it was time. Not because they had nothing else left, though that was true, but because the map said what she feared to think aloud: when the last log burns, come find us. So she set to work. The chamber beneath the barn had been maintained. Every day she'd kept it clear of meltwater, reinforced the clay with more straw, replaced broken tiles with new ones she'd baked in the hearth's ember pan. She'd sealed the ventilation pipe with a mixture of mud and old wool. The airflow, slow and steady, would now pass along the channel from hearth to chamber and back again. This wasn't a fire for cooking. It wasn't a fire for show. This was a signal. She set the log carefully, split the underside, rubbed the channel with lard, packed iron nails into the hollow she'd carved through its middle, then wrapped it in one layer of soaked wool cloth, an old shepherd's trick to delay combustion and force heat downward. And then, just before dusk, she struck the match. It took slow. It always did. The log didn't flame. It smoldered, like a secret trying not to be heard. Smoke trickled down through the hearth and into the funnel. A faint hiss curled upward. Then silence. Just the faint, radiant exhale of something ancient coming back to life. The tiles glowed. The vent warmed. The chamber below took breath. And the house began to change, not quickly, not like a blaze, but minute by minute. The cold faded. The frost in the corners lifted. The moisture from their breath no longer clung to the walls. The windows fogged. Sarah unwrapped her shawl. Henry let go of the fire brick he'd been hugging for days. Even Clara, wrapped in her fur, sat up straight and whispered, "You lit the right way." Eliza turned. "What do you mean?" Clara smiled softly. "It's how they know that you remember." And that was when Emmeline understood. The fire was the message. It wasn't the smoke. It wasn't the heat. It was the way it was built. A method, a language, a call, like lighting a signal beacon in a forgotten tongue. That night, they slept warm for the first time in 10 days. No blankets over their faces, no frost on their lashes, no breath frozen in their throats, just a soft, low heat that lingered like a song inside the walls. And in the hour before dawn, when dreams run deepest and silence is most complete, the second miracle came. A knock, but not at the door. Beneath it, 3 taps, then 2, then 1, like fingers brushing rhythm across the stone. Emmeline sat up instantly, heart pounding. She went to the hearth, knelt, laid her ear to the tile. Tap, tap, silence. Then a faint scritch, a pattern. She opened the cellar trap. It was still dark. The candle barely lit the stairs. She moved down, barefoot. The air down there, it had changed, no longer stale or wet. The clay walls breathed. The chamber under the barn gave off a dry, golden smell, like hay at harvest. And on the far wall, near the vent where the pipe ran low, the mud had been disturbed. A handprint, small, and beside it, tucked into a pocket of straw, a folded cloth scrap. She pulled it gently, unfolded it. Inside, a seed, sunflower, and written beside it, "North, when the thaw begins." That was all. No name, no trail, just a direction and a beginning. She didn't wake the children that night. She returned upstairs, tucked the cloth into her apron, and sat beside the hearth. The log would last until morning, longer even. It burned with the quiet dignity of something built for purpose. Not to impress, not to dazzle, just to endure. The next morning she began preparations. The food would stretch 3 more days. The path north would be slow, but she didn't doubt anymore, because someone out there still remembered. Somewhere out there, the old ways had lived on, hidden, unspoken, passed down, not in books or laws, but in acts, in heat pulled from ash, in women building chambers beneath barns, stoves from tiles, warmth from science the world called witchcraft, only because it didn't bother to understand. She taught the children everything now. No more secrets, no more holding back what men said was woman's knowledge and dismissed as law. She showed them how to test for thermal draw with a wet ribbon, how to press bare feet to clay and hear the breath of the earth, how to bend smoke through metal and trap its heat in bricks. She made Eliza take over the hearth, made Henry stir the fat mixtures and pack the mud. Even Sarah learned to listen for echo chambers in the cellar floor, spots where the heat sounded different and warmth lingered like a whisper. They were going north, not running, not begging, but joining. And Emmeline understood now what her mother meant when she said some knowledge was meant only for winter, because it took frost to remember the heat, and it took hunger to remember the hand that fed you, and it took the fire of a single log, burned right, to light a trail back to everything that mattered. The thaw began with a sound, soft, distant and hollow, drip, not much, just one drop against the cabin's outer sill, like a knuckle on glass, then another, then a tiny stream, sliding off the icicles over the eaves and landing in the slush with a patient rhythm. It was the sound of time cracking open, of the grip of winter loosening, finger by frozen finger. Emmeline sat up before dawn, boots already on, shawl wrapped over her shoulders like armor. The log had burned steady through the night again, down to a heart of coals that glowed clean and low under the tile bed. The children were still asleep, their breathing soft, their faces no longer pinched with cold. Even Clara had color in her cheeks now. A week ago, they'd been on the edge of dying. Now they were only hungry. And heading north, she packed without a word. Not much. 2 blankets torn into strips for wrapping hands and feet, the small remainder of beans and pork fat in oilskin, and 3 flat clay tiles wrapped in wool, still warm from the hearth, still able to retain heat for hours. She took the map, the sunflower seed, the knife, the pistol, now empty, but worn into her hand like a habit she couldn't put down, and she layered every child with clothes, then quilts, then furs. There would be no turning back once they left, no place to hide if they guessed wrong. But she wasn't guessing, she was remembering. Eliza carried Thomas on her back, strapped with a woolen sling. Sarah and Henry each held a tile wrapped in cloth, one under each arm. Clara, though still quiet, walked with a pace that didn't belong to her years, like she'd already made the journey once before, like she knew where the trail would end. They passed the barn before sunrise. It looked like a wreck to anyone else, a ruin of slumped timbers and sagging ice. But Emmeline paused beside it anyway, placed one hand on the collapsed wall, and whispered the way her mother once had, "Thank you for the shelter." Then they walked, through Widow's Hollow, up the ridge, and into the woods that no man visited in winter. At first the trail was hard to find. The map was vague, more suggestion than instruction. North was a direction, not a place. But Emmeline followed where the cold thinned. She stepped where the drifts had sunken slightly. She watched how the branches above bowed, not from snow, but from heat escaping underneath. It was Clara who found the signs. Tiny things, string tied to a birch limb in a pattern too deliberate to be accident, a pile of stones shaped like an arrow, a bark carving, 3 dots in a triangle. They stopped only once to rest, under the sun at its highest, beside a rock still steaming faintly with snowmelt. Emmeline cracked the remaining biscuit into 6 pieces. No one complained, no one asked for more. By dusk, Henry's hands had begun to tremble again. Sarah was pale. Thomas had stopped fussing, which was worse than crying. Emmeline knew they couldn't make another night in the open, not with nothing to burn, not even with the heated tiles. She was about to say they'd dig a hole, cut back into the frozen slope, and make a heat trap like her mother had taught, when Clara stopped walking. She didn't speak, she just pointed. There, between 2 cedar trunks, barely visible behind the veil of snow still clinging to the higher ridge, stood a wall, not of wood, not stone, clay, packed in layers, shaped by hand, baked by fire, with smoke rising soft from its crown, nearly invisible in the grey light. And then, motion. A figure stepped into view, not tall, wrapped in a dark wool cloak, hood drawn low. Then another, and another. Women, not just 2 or 3, dozens, moving silently, stepping from the trees like they'd been there the whole time, part of the forest, part of the cold. They said nothing, they simply opened the gate. It wasn't a settlement, not like townsmen built. It was a warren, half dug, half built, walls of clay and tile and bark, each structure low and thick and breathing heat like an animal. Smoke rose from holes no bigger than a bread loaf. Snow had been brushed from paths, but only barely. They didn't clear for show. They cleared to walk. No fire pits, no wood piles, because they burned nothing. They used the earth. A woman near the front nodded at Emmeline, not in welcome, in recognition. "You made the fire right," she said. Emmeline didn't ask how they knew. The signal fire had been days ago. Maybe they had watchers. Maybe the smoke from a single log, burned the old way, traveled farther than anyone realized. But it wasn't just that. They knew her, because they knew what kind of woman built a clay chamber under a collapsed barn. What kind of mother turned one log into 10 days of heat. What kind of widow laid her children in a root cellar with tiles from a forgotten method of surviving. They knew her because she was them. The woman stepped forward, pulled back her hood, white hair, scar down her jaw, hands as cracked as old paper. "I'm leader," she said. "You're welcome here. For as long as the frost remembers you." It wasn't poetic, it was literal. They didn't keep names for long. They kept stories. They gave Emmeline a low dugout built half into the hillside. Inside, the walls sweated warmth from below. A venting pipe spiraled along one corner. Clay tiles lined the bedding space. A blanket lay across the entrance, dampened and sealed with ash. No firewood in sight, no lanterns. But when the children lay down, they slept deep. Even Thomas, even Clara. For the first time in weeks, Emmeline took a full breath and let it out without a knot in her stomach. Outside, the stars crept over the treetops. Above her dugout, women moved silently through the snow, some older than she'd ever seen, some barely more than girls. They weren't hiding, they weren't running, they were keeping, holding knowledge the world had laughed at. Secrets about airflow, stone memory, the thermal habits of clay and straw, about how lard burns better than wax, how wool slows flame, how cold doesn't kill, it just waits for ignorance. The next day, Emmeline helped seal a new chamber with 2 other women. The day after that, she taught a girl how to make fat bricks from ash and pressed clay. On the 3rd day, they gave her a small tile, blackened and engraved with a symbol she didn't recognize. Later explained simply, "You're one of us now," and that was all. They didn't worship, they didn't lecture, they didn't gather in circles or chant into the woods. They just remembered and passed it on, quiet, relentless, like heat through brick. By the end of the week, Emmeline had nearly forgotten what wood smoke smelled like. Her fingers were stained with clay. Her hands, no longer shaking, moved with confidence she didn't realize she'd lost. The children adapted fast, faster than she did in some ways. Eliza helped Clara carry tiles to a new chamber. Sarah joined a group learning how to patch heat tunnels with lichen-soaked paste. Henry started memorizing the signs carved on bark and stone, some ancient, some recent, all meaningful. They never found out how many women lived there. Dozens, at least. Maybe more. They didn't ask where they came from. Some things didn't need asking, only remembering. That night, Emmeline sat by the wall of her dugout, watching the frost creep up the outside clay and melt before it reached the lip. The air inside smelled like nothing. No smoke, no dust, just warmth. And she thought of the old cabin, of the log that still burned there. Maybe the coals still alive under the stone, waiting to die in silence. And she thought of all the women like her, still out there, still building fires the wrong way, still burning everything too fast, too hot, too loud, still dying. In winters they didn't have to, and she knew one day she'd go back. Not soon, not before spring, but when the time came, she'd walk out of this hidden place, find the next mother with shaking hands and a single log, and teach her how to light it. Slow, deliberate, remembering. Because some storms you can't survive with heat, only with knowledge, and some fires don't burn to warm you, they burn to bring you home.